revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. Will you scroll it up, Penny, for me? I didn't open my own window. It's being blocked by the little, there it is. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. All right. All right, we got Robert joining us. Okay, we're a little bit bigger group here. Good to see you, Robert.
Thank you.
That may be Annette Tudor. Is that you, AT? That's what I'm seeing now, joining us now.
That's me. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Annette. All right, I know we've got Annette, we've got Robert Eby, we've got Katrine Stevens, got Jason Golden, Penny Thurman, and I'm your host, Ted Horrell. So want to say welcome to everybody again. Thank you for engaging in this process over the course of the last however many months it's been. Has it just been a couple of months, I guess, or maybe it's been three months? Okay, it's either been 2 months for every week or 3 months for every other week. I can't figure it out. But thank you for doing this. I've sent Penny a screenshot probably too quickly. Because I read a headline in our local paper that said, "Governor, review of state school district funding complete." And I thought, well, do we still need to meet or not? But the article actually was more accurate than the headline. The headline did say that they are wrapping up this week, and he looks forward to reviewing the final feedback. So I guess the headline was a little bit misleading, but I know I'm sure I can say on behalf of the commissioner and everybody else, and certainly myself, we appreciate everybody participating in this and your input. And we will see what the steering committee and the legislature come up with on the other side of this. What we are charged with doing today is the final piece that was laid out for us, and that is policy considerations. We're going to leave this very open and free flowing and hit the ones that we have feedback on, and we'll finish when we finish. And but we can certainly take as much time as we want to. These are the things that we've been asked to give feedback on. There are what would you say, Penny? Maybe 20 or so, 15 to 20 of these. You can look at them yourself. We don't have to take them in order if you've got your own notes pulled up. But I think maybe we could start with the first one and then kind of jump around after that. There does seem to be a fairly probably significant question of what the definition would be of economically disadvantaged. And I think we've got a lot of, just about all superintendents on this call, and certainly a lot of superintendents on the committee. And that what they seem to be trying to figure out is, would they use direct certification or free and reduced lunch to determine which students get those extra dollars? So I'll just open it up there. Does anybody have any firm feedback in that regard?
I have one comment that may not be long-term, but at least in short-term, because of how the USDA has structured funding for food programs the last 2 years, our free and reduced numbers are likely not very accurate because right now they're giving everyone free lunch. Could just be a short-term issue.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The community feeding is everybody gets it. And Robert, you're probably familiar with that, but basically anybody that wants to eat right now gets to eat for free just under the circumstances. So that's a good point.
I would agree. I think it also went that way when we shifted to direct certification for economically disadvantaged. When that happened, it doesn't account for, kids parents and families living just above that poverty line, your reduced kids. And so it's harder I think our numbers have been off since that time, even with that definition. So, and that definitely is the feedback that our superintendents in our region and the first region talked through at a superintendent study council meeting, because a couple of other people are on different subcommittees, and definitely requesting that we take into consideration reduced students and not just direct cert, that we figure out some way to broaden the definition of economically disadvantaged beyond just direct certification.
And could we not just offer the definition to be direct certification or those students who have who meet the criteria of free or reduced lunch? I mean, because some of those students are going to be double, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? So why
Yes.
could we just finish it and have it be all of it, and that way you're covered? Because I would agree that those who are on reduced pricing are in an economic disadvantage. Otherwise, they wouldn't be meeting that criteria to get that help and support.
Yeah, and am I correct that anyone who's direct cert qualifies for free and reduced lunch? And so the free and reduced lunch, if we used a free and reduced lunch definition, that would include all the direct cert. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
That's a good point. In a Venn diagram, it's larger with direct it's completely contained within the larger circle.
So is it more direct just to say that this group strongly encourages using free and reduced lunch as the determinant?
Yes, I think that captures more students who have needs.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Do we have a consensus?
So that would go to the people that qualify as free and reduced lunch. I think what I heard earlier is that now schools are giving free lunch to everybody. So it'd be those that qualify for free and reduced, right?
But
Right.
basically, we want the weight for everybody, Robert, every single, no,
Okay.
I'm just kidding. Yes, no, you're right. You're exactly right. That's exactly right. It was those that actually qualified in the pre-pandemic situation. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because there are some schools that are permanently on the community feeding if they have a higher enough concentration of poverty, but the weight would only go to those that qualify for free and reduced lunch. Okay. Are there do we want to hit concentration of poverty while we're at it? Are there thoughts on that one? And then maybe we can skip around after that. So they're currently saying if you attend a Title I school, and I will note that can be confusing as well. Right now, we just came out of a situation where for 5 years, because of a grandfathering situation, all of the schools in municipal Shelby County were considered Title I because the county was Title I, and we had to share their Title I, their poverty numbers, even though they really weren't applicable. We even said that money shouldn't come to us. That should go to higher poverty areas. And they said, well, if you don't take it, it's going back to the federal government. We said, we'll take it. So the state actually said that on our behalf, and I agree with it. But is Title I, a Title I school, a good enough definition for saying this school has a concentration of poverty?
I think so. So we're saying that for the ED category, weighted category, you would get additional dollars for your direct certification students in any school, and you'd get additional dollars for concentration of poverty for students in a title school. Is that what we're saying?
My understanding is yes, on top of that, there would be additional money that your school would get.
Okay.
So
But we're
I
saying
think
rather than direct cert, we want to expand that to be free and reduced lunch in any school, and Title I gets additional dollars for a Title I designated school.
yes. So again, my understanding is if 20% of the students in my school qualify for free and reduced lunch, then 20% of those students would get the base plus that ED weight. But if I have enough students and I don't know what the threshold is, but if I have enough students that causes the entire school to qualify as a Title I school. I'd get the base for everybody. I'd get the weight for those that are on free and reduced lunch. And then there'd be another amount of money that I would get to acknowledge that having a majority of students in poverty is a different situation than having 30% of your students in poverty.
I think that works for me. I'm in favor of that.
Okay. Consensus there?
Agree.
All right. The rest of these, my understanding is we don't have to hit all of them. If y'all would like to, we can try and just move on down the list. Is there a preference from the group? All right. In the absence of any thoughts, we'll kind of move on down. The next one is the definition of sparsity. I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of insight into where the line is that makes a district sparse. They're saying the federal definition is 10, but the range is 10 to 25 students per square mile.
I suspect that municipal and fast-growing and suburban districts don't work on this issue very often.
No.
It's primarily rural.
Yep.
But if I were sparse, I'd want it to be 10. I guess.
No,
No,
if I were sparse, I'd want it to be 25.
Yeah.
25, yeah. Well, and if I were municipal and fast growing, I'd want it to be 25 as well, right? Because we do have parts of our Lakeland's kind of a, for example, Lakeland's a tall municipality. It's tall and not very wide. So there's North Lakeland. There aren't a lot of kids up there, and I think if you put it all together, we probably still wouldn't qualify. But higher is better for us.
So who determines the range of 10 to 25? Where does that come from? Federal is 10, but the range is 10 to 25. Is that just what the state has defined we can say, or?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
I'm not sure about the answer to that, but I do know that I facilitate the higher ed and post-secondary readiness subcommittee, and they also made the recommendation of 25 students and below would be their recommendation.
We might as well throw in with them, you think?
Yep, I agree with that.
All right.
Is that an average over the district? Is that how that's calculated, or what? Or if a student, if there's a square mile out there that has 10 students in it, would those number of students get extra dollars? I'm just trying to understand what we're saying here.
Yeah, and I'm not clear on that either. And apparently the subcommittee was not clear either. So that's why they want some, the rest of the subcommittees to, the steering committee was not clear. So they wanted you all to weigh in.
I was thinking that was an average, and the reason, even though Lakeland has a lot of kind of spread out, even rural areas, we also have the opposite of that. These more traditional suburban areas where there's a development has 160 kids in it that would probably balance that out where we wouldn't qualify. So, well,
the reason I asked that question, I know in Oak Ridge there was a subdivision that was constructed that's 10 miles out. It actually is almost outside the city limits. It's across the river, and so that requires just a special bus to transport the people, all the way back in. So, that would probably fit, at least at the initial, in that sparse area until, any population grows or something like that. So would those people get additional dollars to allow for transportation to them, or is it an average over the district? That's the reason I asked the question.
Yeah. In my mind, what I think that's the right question. To me, it has to do with, like you said, bus transportation, and maybe it's I think it should probably be the square miles of your service area, where the northernmost kid lives and the southernmost kid, and divided by the number of students. To me, or the number of students divided by the square miles, I guess.
That makes sense, typically, but I think it needs to be defined.
Well, what do y'all think about that definition? The square miles of your transportation service area, I'm sorry, your total number of students divided by the square mileage of your transportation service area. Be a start, anyway.
As good as any to get, like I said, to get started.
I agree.
Okay. All right.
Dr. Ward, let me make sure I have that. Total number of students divided by, what did you say?
The square mileage of the area served by your transportation system.
Okay, thank you.
Angela, I think I saw that you joined. Is that right?
Yes, I am here.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm great, thank you.
Good. All right, they had a question about teacher salaries. What, if any, requirement should the formula require on investing new education dollars into existing educator salaries moving forward?
I don't know about the requirements, but I'd say yes. There should be new dollars to increase teacher salaries. I don't know what that should be. I think also in our superintendent's group, someone, I guess Jamie Corwin, she's our regional, I guess Penny's counterpart in our end of the state, but she said that is there a group that has the teacher of the year leading it, the educators group maybe? Their recommendation might have been a minimum base of 50,000 as the starting salary, state salary, so increasing that from 38 to 50. And or a 20% increase, something like that. I don't know if I have that 20% right. I don't know that there's that much money in the state to increase all of us to 20% increase, but they were being very ambitious. So
Yep.
I think our base teacher salary should not rank in the bottom of the nation.
So here's what I'm thinking about when they talk about policy from this standpoint is I know, again, this is a funding formula. It is not a spending formula. And I know there are districts out there that take teacher salaries when the governor gives a 4% raise, some of you, maybe y'all do, and they spread it across all, jobs within the district.
Mhm.
And so as I read through this thing, I wonder if they're saying, are you saying that the additional dollars are required to go to licensed educators or what? But again, that gets into spending versus funding. So just a thought.
Yeah, and the next
had
one
that-
says, are there any other policies for teacher salaries that should be included? So I think we can try to address both.
Yeah.
Robert,
I had that same thought that Mr. Eby did. The way I read that was a restriction on the per student, on use of the per student funds instead of factoring in an additional element into the per student formula. And maybe I misread that, but that's the way I read this. Requirement should the formula require on investing new ed dollars into existing educator salaries.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think the question and the legislature has been trying to kind of be tight on that with some of the funding that they've done. And I think they're asking if the governor's budget increases education by, I don't know, $200 million, is there a percentage of that needs to be required to go toward teacher salaries or not? Should it be totally at the discretion of the district?
Well, so if we suggested they increase the minimum teacher salary, which is the 38,000, that only goes to teachers. With that policy caveat that increase the minimum base teacher salary, which is for teachers or licensed, certified, however you want to phrase that. Maybe that's what the teacher group meant, that the 20% increase in the base salary is just for licensed individuals. I don't know. Teacher salary.
Well, I think we certainly are there any other policies for teacher salaries? I think we could say raise the minimum teacher salary to $50,000 and fund accordingly.
Well, I'm not suggesting 50,000. I just think there needs to be an increase to the base, whatever that is.
Absolutely, I agree.
I think there should be more funding and an increase to teacher salaries for sure, but we've talked about all of our salaries. We're going to have to be competitive with other areas as well.
Well, and we also know that that's something that tends to happen when the governor talks about increases for teachers. He'll say 3% or 4%, as Robert said, and that's very different depending on which county you teach in or which school system you teach in. If your average teacher salary is, $40,000, 4% is one thing. If your average teacher salary is $60,000, that's a very different thing.
Yeah, the inference I have from if this proposed funding formula is approved by the legislature, the inference I have is that method's going to change, right? Because they're talking, when they mentioned that we've traditionally experienced, it's 3% is added to the state portion.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
My reading of this from our perspective is I would not be in favor of placing a restriction on how the LEA spent the per student funding that they received.
I like it. Hey,
Okay.
Bill.
Everyone.
How you doing? All right. That reflects my thoughts on it. Everybody good with that? Do we have a consensus?
Yep.
Okay. All right. And then the next question was, are there any other policies for teacher salaries that should be included? All right. In the absence of specific feedback there, I'm just going to ask everybody to kind of, if you've got it open to the recommendations page, or you can either look at Penny is flipping through this for us. If you've got any other specific policies that this group feels like we need to weigh in on. I would say on the tutoring one, the question's pretty direct and seems fairly obvious. Should there be funding in the formula for this legally required support? Yes. In fact, we should say there should be funding for all legally required support. No unfunded mandates.
Yes.
Agree.
Okay.
And if I may, I want to jump back. Dr. Tudor spoke to the need in Tennessee to increase funding for teacher salaries. I think that might be in part an answer to that top question. That might be a place for us to include that.
I agree.
You guys may have already hit that. It might not. My brain might not have processed it appropriately.
No, Penny. Let's confirm. Penny, under teacher salaries, do we want to say there should be a substantial increase to the minimum teacher salary in Tennessee? Is that specific enough, or?
Substantial increase?
Yes.
Okay. I also have what Annette mentioned, suggests that the increase in minimum base salary for licensed teachers. Annette, did you want me to keep that?
I think we're saying the same thing. I think that.
Okay.
Yep,
And
yep.
then someone mentioned would not be in favor of placing restrictions on increase received.
Correct.
So Ted, can I offer a tweak to the comment you made about the minimum teacher salary?
Please.
I would, even though this isn't a funding model, I like the idea of us having a commentary in there as to increase funding rather than increase minimums.
So, yeah, absolutely. You won't get any disagreement from me. How do we best state that?
Penny, could you put "and" in that comment that Ted had? Increase of the minimum and state funding.
Yes.
All right. There's a question, please review the CTE content and provide feedback on how Tennessee may choose to address CTE considerations. That question's a bit too vague for me to really offer any feedback on, but if anybody has any, let us know.
We did say something about making sure every district had a CTE director, didn't we? We said that last week or week
Yes.
before.
That's been submitted.
Just throwing this out there, since we're looking at career and college readiness, shouldn't we look at, when we talk about CTE, we should look at the alignment to the skill set of the workforce within the community. I'm going all over the place with this, but I find that too often, we're offering some, we've kind of cleaned that up here in Rutherford County. Because we aligned ours to our current workforce development, what the business partners were saying. But I think if we're going to invest in career and technical education, it should lead to a high-paying job within our community or outside our state, or maybe throughout the United States. So I think that investment should be strategic.
That's a great point. So what would our recommendation be? Would that be an outcomes?
Perhaps it would be, industry certifications is obviously one of the outcomes that's been suggested. But I do think that if we're, industry certifications, you can pick up OSHA 10, OSHA 20, and that's great. However, that's not going to get you open doors for you that would lead to a higher paying position,
Higher ed and post-secondary earlier in the week, that subcommittee made a recommendation. They've had lots of conversations about CTE. Their recommendation was that secondary and post-secondary align so students can benefit to create a highly qualified workforce.
I promise I didn't read that, but that sounds great.
It's kind of amazing how a lot of these threads on policies, especially from districts, will be almost the same, just spot on.
Okay. That sounded good to me too, Bill. Is everybody comfortable making that one of our recommendations as well? Okay.
Yes.
All right. How might you consider a K-2 weight or additional investment in the earlier grades?
I was wondering about that one. Do we know, is K-2 going to be in the base if we are looking at, say, smaller class sizes and all students have the opportunity to be a part of the journey K-2? Is that in the base, and is this something additional, or is this how we are considering getting some K-2 emphasis? I might be confused.
Anybody have any insight or guesses as to what direction they may be looking?
Penny, do you happen to know, are they looking at K-2 in the base at all, or is it just in weight?
It's not been discussed. The commissioner's not shared that with us.
I think we talked about there may be, when you think about it, K-2 has smaller class sizes, but probably needs less supplemental, support staff. And I don't know if I'm saying that right, as far as electives and things, that there may be almost a wash between the need for additional staffing that you get as you get into middle and high school versus as the classes get bigger, the number of classes kind of tends to increase. But I guess the question is, does there just need to be a flat out K2 weight? I feel like
there's a document that I looked at early on in there's a 50 state comparison.
Uh-huh.
I don't know, I can't even tell you where I found it, but it came out of some of the resources that were provided to us. Like California, the District of Columbia, Florida, Hawaii, they have breakdowns where there's an added weight by a grade band. So like California has a 8,500 for K3, and then it's less for 4-6, a little bit more for 7-8, and then 9,500 for 9-12. Considering 9-12, you can't do some of your classes might have very few kids, and others you can load them up depending on what they are. So, but that is in their base amount where they've actually delineated it in the base as opposed to an added weight for K2, for instance. So I think you could suggest it either way, but there are some states who do it in the base. It's just a different base.
So we could suggest the formula should have differing bases depending on grade band, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily sure I'm suggesting that. I was just pointing out that some do. The majority do not. The majority have a single base. There are just a few that have that as a different option. So it could be a weight as opposed to tweaking the base too much. If you just have a base, it simplifies that piece of it. I don't know.
If you make the base high enough, it doesn't matter, right? You can do what you need to do.
But I think that if you're looking at a differentiation, clearly you want to have the students on grade level by grade 3. And so that would say, you have some emphasis in the K2, K3, K through 3 or K3, K2, since it probably hasn't been there in the past. So I think what they're asking here is, do you put an extra weight on K2? And it would make sense to me to have some weight factor. It may not be as heavy as some of the other ones, but some differentiation there.
Okay.
Yes, I would completely agree.
I would also agree.
All right. Well, let's. I think what I'm hearing is that there should be additional weight consideration for students in grades K2.
Yes.
All right. Are there outcome options for middle school that come to mind? We've spent more time talking about probably high school outcome options. Are there those that are specific, I guess, is the question for middle school?
One of our goals on the state board, and actually we're going to be at our board meeting next week, passing a rule or policy, is that every student in middle school will have a pathway, 9 through 12 pathway, and whether it's, and they may look at different, not just one pathway, but they'll have a plan. And so I think the outcome for middle school is that you have a plan for high school, for post-secondary. So I don't know. I'm trying to think how that would tie into the funding process here.
Would that include some kind of career counselor, perhaps, in the middle schools?
Good point. Yes.
I would be all for that. I think that is probably where we fall short a lot, is having someone in the middle school as a career counselor.
So what we might do is put a plan in there to increase career counseling, such that each middle school has a career counselor to provide the plan to yield the outcomes or something like that.
Sounds good to me. Everybody good? Okay. Then they asked the same question about elementary school. Other outcomes for elementary school.
clearly the outcomes for elementary school, I think you got to be on grade, a goal of being on grade level at third grade for English and math, reading and math.
And I'd like to, when we say on grade level, I want to put a plug in saying using appropriate assessment, because that's a
Exactly.
conversation that
Exactly.
happens.
Yep. Good point.
Would we include growth in that outcome for elementary?
I'd be in favor of that. Any thoughts otherwise, or?
Could you repeat that thought, Dr. Hoare?
That growth should be considered.
What was the prior one, using appropriate assessments?
Basically the outcomes for students performing on grade level in math and English using appropriate assessments. Growth should also be considered.
Okay.
I would say math and reading instead of math and English.
Oh, thank you. I agree. Math and reading is clear.
Thank you.
Okay, accountability measures that should be included in any new formula proposal.
Ted, do you have any examples that have already been proposed?
Of accountability measures?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think they have talked about achievement measures and growth measures, generally speaking, in terms of accountability. I think really the ones that I think we're familiar with, probably graduation rates, attendance.
Ready to graduate.
Ready to graduate. Yeah.
What accountability measures are in our current funding model?
Oh, I don't believe any in the current funding.
What would be the reason for adding that into a new funding model?
Paying for things like assessments on some of the high stakes, like IB, Cambridge, to offset the cost of some of the students. If they are successful, the industry certifications, some of the industry certifications, quite frankly, can be anywhere from, $50 up to $100, $300. For example, mechatronics, if you're taking a test on that, it's expensive.
When I think of accountability measures, I think of performance. Are you going to give an extra weight or bonus for well-performing schools? It's kind of how I would evaluate that.
And I may be reading it wrong. To me, what we're describing is outcomes based. That if you do something, you get something. I think when the legislators talk about this, in some cases they're talking about, we don't want to fund schools that are underperforming, and we're going to hold you accountable. And if you don't hit certain marks, there'll be a price exacted.
Yeah, my view is an accountability measure should not be included in a public school funding model. So that would be my answer. What accountability measures? None.
Couldn't have said it any better. Any objections?
I abstain.
And I understand why.
I do think that we perhaps need to be prepared, because I think we all know that there will be some accountability outcomes, and quite frankly, there are some, like, for example, FAFSA. I don't see that as being something that you should get funding for, or additional funding for, because your kids have filled out the paperwork for it. I mean, that's just me.
Yeah, I guess I see some of the outcomes that were listed on the draft. Some of those we even talked about. This has a different feeling to me compared to those outcome measures. This
Yeah,
feels like you are rewarded or maybe penalized. It just feels different, this particular question.
I think it's the carrot versus the stick. To me, outcomes-based funding is a carrot that you should be rewarded if you're putting extra effort into making sure these certain things happen is the theory. But at least, yeah, the way this accountability question is phrased, it sounds more like the stick method.
Yes, because if you look at the ones above that we just talked about, it was policy:outcomes, policy:outcomes. Now we get to policy:accountability.
To me, accountability, there's no accountability in the funding, but what the accountability has been, kind of the worst case scenario is you wind up going, your school goes to the state, goes to the achievement school district, essentially. And I think there's going to be, I'll be shocked if at some point there's not some kind of accountability that says if your school is underperforming, then you qualify for vouchers that you can take somewhere else. I mean, that's an accountability measure. I mean, that's the stick method. And I think, like Katrine, I disagree with that approach and don't think it's reasonable. But
I think it is reasonable to assume, again, if we're providing student success, post-secondary success is our mission, that we've got to provide them that opportunity, and there ought to be some measure that says whether we're doing it or not. And if we're not doing it, there's got to be some consequences. What it is, I don't know, and hopefully we'll get the funding. I mean, the bottom line is you can't expect that accountability if we're not going to provide the funding to allow the districts to go out and do it, pay the teachers and have the resources, et cetera. But if they do that to an adequate level, if we adequately fund it, then I think we ought to expect there ought to be value provided.
I struggle with the concept of there ought to be financial consequences when you, as a public school system, and we as a public school system, serve all comers. And I'm not sure that our teachers and counselors think, or maybe ever will think in terms of, oh, the district's going to lose blank amount of dollars if this particular student doesn't get a particular score on blank. That's, I see a gap in the logical relationship between either the funding or the consequence and those there. So, and I recognize that there's a lot of arguments there. I'm struggling with that. And I know that, our county, at least based on past performance in the bits that I've seen, we have the potential to grow from some of that. But I'm concerned about the stick, I guess, is the best way I can articulate this. And I don't know that the funding or that the formula draft even implied that there was a stick in the proposed formula, but maybe I've missed it.
And maybe, as Ted says, the accountability is if the schools don't perform, they end up on the achievement school district, and there's not a place for it within the funding formula. I think I agree with that.
okay, I think we have a tentative consensus there, so I'll take that. All right, what information should be included in public reporting for school and district level financials? Now the flip side is I'm in favor of, just every bit of the most granular data. And that's part of why I object so strongly to single letter grades. I'd rather have 24 bits of granular information about what's happening in a school than one kind of grade that suggests that it sums up the whole school. And I personally, I feel the same way about the finances too. There's probably not any bit of financial information that I wouldn't be comfortable, with, but
I agree with you, Ted. Very transparent.
Same.
Agreed.
I agree, Ted.
Okay. So is it oversimplified to say we recommend that as much accurate financial reporting as possible? Okay. All right, they have a good question about, and this one's come up as one I think that they've really wanted feedback on. Should the funding reflect the current year or the prior year as it does now? Right now, we're funded based on how many kids we had the last year. There is a kind of truing up that comes toward the end of the school year, which is always helpful. But do we want the state to try to do something in real time and make those adjustments in real time to meet the costs of that year? For declining enrollment districts, it may be harder to adjust budgets in real time. So given the two sides of that coin, are there
Yeah, I'll start off, Ted. I think Clarksville Montgomery is the same way. We need that growth money. We're hedging our local tax dollars until that comes in. So, we need the growth money in real time.
And I agree with Bill. We've been talking about that on a continual basis, that we need that in the right time, not lagging. We need it right now. We're continuing to grow every day.
So I think the implication here of the question is, if you're a district that's not in our position and it's in the opposite position, and in real time they are cutting your funds and you're letting teachers go right there and then, rather than at the end of the year when the reckoning. I think do we feel comfortable saying that's just the way it is sometimes, and we've got to have the money to and I'm not disagreeing, I'm just, for argument's sake,
Could there not be a reconciliation point in time where there be reconcile the books prior to getting into a substantial deficit? I mean, I'm just asking. I'm probably there. I know it would, and quite frankly, we do know that there's a large number that would have to do this, but we're also talking about, I don't think there's a greater number of, large number of fastest growing districts. So that, I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there, but I do know that it is impactful. I think you all know that those you are in those districts, that it's very impactful.
One method that I've seen that we've seen to address growth is the schedule with which the funding is passed on to schools. And if I'm not mistaken, there are 4 different months, and it's based on ADM, maybe. Am I right about that?
Yes.
And as your ADM increases, if you have an increase, then at the February payment, that reflects that increase. And so that I'm hoping that when they work on this formula, they look at their schedule, and the per student numbers go with that student based on the payment schedule, prorated based on the amount of time remaining in the school year, or something to that effect, to address that mid-year growth.
So I'm not making a mistake. What I'm hearing you say, Jason, is you're saying making sure that that money is earlier than February, the first part of it, earlier than February for that growth, or what do you? I mean, quite frankly,
making sure that the per pupil fund is not just decided on an annual basis, because we have expenses related to those students as they arrive mid-year.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Agree.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to me, since getting into this line of work, that with the technology that we've got and the daily, there was I feel like that formula for when those numbers are determined, even the 20-day reports and all these things, is almost based on a bygone era where things were done more by hand, or simpler computers. But they're pulling our numbers literally every single day through EIS. It does seem like there could be more frequent and more accurate accounting of the funds. It doesn't seem unreasonable to me at all to think that they would be adjusted quarterly even. I mean, that 9 weeks into the school year, there would be one adjustment and then at the semester, rather than the big true up that happens in February, as you've said, which is
Too late.
too late. Yes. So I think our answer is the former of the two options that it says. Should funding reflect the current year? I think the answer is yes. And I think the recommendation that I'm hearing is funding should reflect the current year and be adjusted in as real time as possible to changes in enrollment. Does that summarize it adequately? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Let me make sure I have that. Your answer to the first question is yes. Growing districts need funds in real time. Look at schedule and per student numbers are prorated. Make sure per pupil fund is not annually distributed, possibly quarterly. I tried to capture everything.
Yeah, I would take out the yes because the question is an or, like should it do one or the other? So I don't want to say yes.
Okay.
Let's say yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, it should reflect the current year, and the rest of it was perfect, I think. Thank you. All right, I got about 7 minutes if we're going to keep on schedule. There's a similar question. Enrollment may fluctuate down in a given year, up or down. Should there be any consideration for hold harmless for fixed cost, or should funding be specific and reflective of the actual enrollment? I think we've just said our preference is reflective of the actual enrollment. You just have to plan accordingly and keep your fund balance and make the adjustments we've got to make. Are we all comfortable with that? Okay, I think we've answered that one. How should we consider maintenance of effort at the local level? Provides consistent funding, but may deter local investment because of the requirement to continue. I'm in favor of maintenance of effort.
I think most districts are. I think it's important to be able to count on that. So
absolutely. Okay. Are there the final question they had? Are there PD professional development opportunities or additional supports that should be provided?
I'm not sure what that's asking. Is that funding for professional development, or we need professional development to understand the funding model? What is that in reference to?
I believe I believe is too strong. I would guess the intention is, do we need funding for professional development beyond what the state provides? Beyond
we had that in our list, I think. I feel like we did at one point. I'm not sure if it landed in there the last time, but
yes.
So I would say yes.
Okay, let's say that yes, professional development and support should be provided.
In a broader sense, I'm thinking about the principle of if something's required, it needs to have appropriate funding to meet the requirement. And we've all heard over the years that that phraseology on the negative side, unfunded mandate, but on the positive side, since they're looking at the opportunity to start from the beginning, fund those items that are required.
Good. And maybe more specifically, but when we say funding, teachers and staff should be compensated for professional development outside of work hours. Sometimes that is a question. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's a stipend, but I think we need to be very clear on that.
And it's a licensure renewal requirement for everyone who holds an endorsement of some sort with PDPs and the evaluation system. So the unfunded mandate of that, to Jason's point, is a good one.
Agreed.
let me go back to the hold harmless on the ADM ship and bring up one point and see how we want to deal with that. I think we ought to hold harmless districts for early graduation. I don't think we want to penalize districts for encouraging students to graduate early. So I haven't seen that anywhere in here, and I think we ought to make a specific point about that.
There's a lot of wisdom in that. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
I
I
totally
like that. You know, this ready to move on. I mean, it's
Yeah.
in law. I love that.
I do too.
agree.
So Penny, did you I guess grasp, or did you get what he was suggesting?
Yes, that don't penalize districts for encouraging students to graduate early.
Yeah, and I think what we're specifically saying is that shouldn't count against our enrollment, right?
Right,
Basically.
exactly.
Yeah,
Okay.
don't reduce funding mid-year for early graduation,
Exactly.
early graduates.
In other words, you ought to be able to identify the number of students that you have that are graduating early, and you keep that funding, you know, for that student throughout the year.
Thank you. Great point.
I have it.
All right.
Thanks.
And the final, as the last 3 minutes here wind down, the final catch-all, is there any policy that was not inquired after that we would like the steering committee to consider? All right. Well, I see an open door, or I know an open door when I see one. So I'm going to walk through that door and say, once again, thank you for everybody's participation in this subcommittee. I'll say it again, we had the best group. I think we had some great feedback. I'm optimistic that it'll be taken seriously and considered meaningfully. And I know we'll all be kind of watching eagerly to see whether or not the legislature decides to take this up in this session or perhaps a later one. But I feel like regardless, we have furthered the conversation and hopefully the interests of this subcommittee in the group. Next Friday, there'll be a little hole in my schedule and a hole in my heart where you guys live on this committee. And I thank you all again for what you've done. Penny, let's all give a little round of applause to Penny Thurman for keeping us together and on track. She always kind of talks me through it prior to the meeting, which is a huge help to me as well. Any closing thoughts or words before we say goodbye?
Yeah, Ted, this is Bob. I'd like to make one final closing too. This has been very helpful to me, because one thing we on the state board want to do is hear from the districts. And while I am the 3rd congressional district representative, I am the vice chair of the board too. And so I would encourage each one of you, if there's anything I can do to help you out, any questions you have, don't hesitate. My email's on, don't hesitate to ask. And Penny, thanks for your support on this committee. And
Oh,
Ted,
you're very welcome.
for your
And I
leadership.
know the department knows what a heavy, heavy lift this was on all of the subcommittee members, and we appreciate your time and effort and thoughtful consideration greatly.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
your
Bob.
leadership, Ted. Yeah.
Thank you, Penny. Thank you, Penny and Ted.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Penny and Ted, and the rest of you. Great conversations.
Absolutely.
Yes, it has been.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.